Right, Assalamu alaikum. I'm back. They've gone out for an outing with all the children. So I'm alone here, so I'm going to continue and see as far as I can read to you the rest of the book. So we left off at the time when the telephone rang. I had a meeting. A person was confirming the meeting at 11 o'clock, and then we ended off the fact that there was on page 13 the Muslim lifestyle under its own Sharia, Islamic law or code of life, gave Muslims an exclusive identity superior to the materialistic, power driven culture of the dominators. Very good point that Professor Azam makes there. He says the Muslims had their own Sharia, their own code of law, their own structure, and it allowed them to live a lifestyle which was exclusive. They had exclusive identity, superior in to the materialistic, power-driven culture of the dominators. What is interesting is that in a book which was written dealing with Lady Barnard, I read that the fact that the Muslim men wore these robes, to salah with, the colonialists were upset because who are they to wear these robes? And they believe robes are only supposed to be um, worn by the kings and the queens, the echelons of the Western world or the colonialists. But there, these men were walking with robes, and turbans. It really upset him, but not knowing it wasn't for show. It was basically to cover the body so that we saw, you don't have your bum sticking out on the one side and your pants is not tight. And you basically focus on the creator, the person in front of you is fully covered. Men and women are fully covered so that our focus is on the creator when we salah, not on the fashion of the people. So the robes that the Muslims wore and the Imams wore to go to masjid is part of their attire to respect the Creator. It's not about being, ostentatious or whatever the case. Now, but the colonialists hated that. The fact that these Muslims were walking with robes, flowing robes. So it's just so interesting. And you will find, for instance, in the artwork, that you'll find, for instance, the slaves being drawn by the chains by a black leading another black slave, and you at the and on the side you'll have these Muslims walking around in their robes and their conical hats or their turbans in the artwork. So the artwork itself also shows the fact that the Muslims were free and that the slavery was actually more the black slavery um, that was sold by black people, owners and leaders in the black states to the Europeans and as a money making business. And it's a very sad story that we have of black leadership that actually use their people as commodities. Something that it really disturbed me when I studied economics, because one must realize that slavery was an economic product. It was an economic commodity. It was a commodity. People were commodities in those days. And there still is. May Allah protect us, inshallah. I'm just busy with the ayah in the Quran where Allah talk to لا أقسم بهذا البلد. Allah Ta'ala says, um, about the city of Makkah, how honored it is. And Allah swears by the city, and it talks about the high road or the difficult road, and how to get to what is this difficult road, and Allah speaks about freeing a slave is one of the most powerful things that a Muslim can do. So you can see it wasn't just about freeing the slaves for the masters so that they can, in actual fact, not drink wine. It's about Muslims having this particular instruction of the Quran, which comes from the Sharia, that the higher road, the difficult road, man is created in hardship and toil, that ayah says. And it's a hard road, but if you want to, what is this hard road Allah speaks about? Is to free a slave and to give food to people that are poor, that don't have money and food, etc. So it explains in that ayah. So you can see how the Muslims of the Cape had that kind of desire to do good to other people, especially if they are oppressed. And if they couldn't, but to change their mindset and to make them realize that they are free people, their souls are free, they can in actual fact transcend the oppression of the colonialists. It must be said to be a descendant of those kind of people, but you're a good person, but you are a descendant of colonialists. For you to actually know that history, how your forefathers in actual fact oppressed people, and how some of the people still oppress other people who are of another color. And you are not that way as a fair-skinned white person. It must be hard to actually see this, and to know that there is still that kind of oppression of people of color, like you have now in the Russian war against Ukraine. The reporters were actually racist in saying that these people are people like us, blue eyes and blonde hair and white. They're not like other people, as if the other people who suffer is like not people, So it's just, they are so prejudiced in the news. They're not even shy about it. They not even feel that they should really consider all people, even the concept of the refugees. The white refugees are moving in, and the others are being kept from moving into the other countries. The kind of racism that's coming forward is like, it's tiring, but that's their punishment that they are actually accumulating. Very interesting. The Quran says the purpose of life, the understanding that I have of this verse, the tafsir of this verse, is the purpose of life is to purge the Muslim from any evil that he has committed, or that anything that he does wrong, is to purge, to clean him from it, and to extract any possible blessing out of a disbeliever. And that's the purpose of life, to extract the hardship that Muslims go through, or the suffering that Muslims go through, is to cleanse them, and so that they enter Jannah. And the ease that the kafir is going through, and the oppression that he exercises, whatever the case may be, is to exclude every little bit of blessing he might be able to get, so that the ease of the people of the Jahannam. May Allah protect us, inshallah. I mean, it's a very, very, very hard life, in the sense of a test for each individual. Where are we going to be? And if we don't follow the Sharia, the advice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the punishment is severe. In the Quran, at the back, Allah explains what is the punishment of the person who is a kafir, and the person who is a munafiq, who is in actual fact pretends to be a Muslim, but then he runs with the kuffar and says the Muslims are bad, and then he runs with the Muslims and says the kafir is bad. The kind of munafiq which is like playing both sides. Those are the worst kind of people. So and Allah also explains what type of people will be the worst kind of munafiqs and the worst kind of kafir in the Quran. It's very, very clear. The truth of the Quran is very clear. So let's continue. I'm adding all these things to make it like a little exciting, in the sense of, yes, it's not just a reading, but it's a distilling of information, and hoping that the minds of myself and others open up to the truth, inshallah. So we go on. Professor Ajam uses words like, this confidence of Muslims strengthen their commitment to Islam. The fact that they had this confidence that they know they're on the right path, not arrogance, confidence, in the sense of knowing by the fact that they experience the power of Allah. They experience the respect that people have for them. They experience the fear that the colonials actually have for the Muslim, even though the Muslim is in minority. But they know And actually, Allah says in the Quran that the kafir actually fears the mu'min and the Muslim. He has this natural fear, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places fear in their hearts for the believer. Even though the believer have less people, less implements, less armory, whatever, the kafir has a fear for the believer. It's in his heart. Allah places it in there. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives confidence to the believer, even though they are small. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him that I support you with a malaika. We will see some of these things happening in the Cape, which really made the kuffar or the colonialists fear the Muslims, even though we are only 1% of people. And this is what attracted other people to become Muslim, is that the kind of experience that they have in the presence of Muslims, that they would want to be Muslims. One of the things about the Cape Muslims is what they call upatafels. Their openness to share food and to invite you to come and eat. Many people have become Muslim because of this openness of Muslims and their freedom to share their food and to give sadaqah, etc. Even today, there are Muslims that are non-Muslims that are saying, I'd rather give my money and my charity to Gift of the Givers, which is a Muslim organization, and doctors, etc., that assist people all over the world, than to give it to other people. I'd rather give it there. And I mean, these are non-Muslims speaking. And it's today, 2022. And this all comes from the Quran. I mean, Muslims are acting because the Quran encourages you to free the slave, to give sadaqah, to help the person who's downtrodden. I mean, the Quran tells you, don't cry to the mu'min, who's a believer, don't cry for peace, establish it. Don't cry and moan about peace, establish it. There's another ayah in the Quran where Allah Ta'ala says, is the one who moans the same as the one who follows the Sirat al-Mustaqim. Now, it's translated as the straight path, but if you go deeper into the Arabic, it's is the one who moans the same as the one who follows the path of power. Quwwah, mustaqim. The power, the strength, is the one who moans the same as the one who follows the strength, the path of strength and power. So generally translated as a straight path, but it's a very lower English translation of that word. So here you see this particular Islam being practiced by the poor people, but they have a culture that is powerful, a culture that is rich, which the colonialists didn't have. They're like, more materialistic and trying to hold on to earth and stealing this and oppressing this one, etc. So there is definitely, through the Sharia, a confidence that the Muslims had, it strengthened their commitment to Islam and made them strong under all circumstances. You'll see later on how the writer or the Dr. Ajam, Professor Ajam, explains how the respect for the Cape Muslims, how they handled the epidemic. There were epidemics here, and how they handled it. Imams would go, to people that had TB, etc., were dying of TB, and they would go there and make dua for them and not worry about whether they get infected. And they never got infected, alhamdulillah. They just continued and did dua for people, etc. You'll see that later on in Professor Adam's work. So the Muslims in the colonial Cape operated in terms of their own norms as far as the constraints of the European domination made it possible. In other words, as long as they can live an Islamic life, even though there are restrictions, they were strong in that, and they used it to the best of their ability. Children who attended schools in the homes of the imams were directly exposed to the life of the teacher and the teacher's family. So you find that the people who went to madrasa in the homes of the Muslims and imams, they became friends with the family and the children, and they interacted with them. By 1830, 80 homes conducted Muslim schools, madrasas. Reverend Saunders in 1836 stated, quote, The Muslims have opened schools for instruction of colored children. The black man has no desire to enter into Christian churches, whose gates have long been shut against him. He prefers joining with those who have been his friends in his distress, who invite and encourage him to bring his children to the same school, to attend the same mosque, and to look forward to meeting in the same paradise. Now that is a beautiful quotation. And this is Reverend Saunders. It states the fact that the Muslims were free, qualitative, family-based people who opened up their doors to black slaves who came. He gave them support, opened up their doors to them. This is from a reverend. And so I don't know where... Okay, I know it's concocted narratives that they're trying to sell tourism, but you can see from the Christian reverend, this particular statement tells it all. I'm going to read it again. The Muslims have opened schools for instruction of their children. Well, okay, they call it colored children. And the black man has no desire to enter into Christian churches, whose gates have long been shut against them. They didn't allow them to become Christian or to be in their churches, only at the back where the slave quarters are. And there are churches here where have slave quarters at the back. They would show you here in Long Street. There's one church next to the hardware store that have the slave quarters still as a tourist attraction. So these blacks were terribly treated. You know, the UCT business school is actually in a place where the holding cells of the slaves were as they entered with the ships from their black countries. And, you know, I walked in there and I could sense still the suffering of these people that were brought in as slaves into the docks and into these slave holding cells at the UCT business school here by the waterfront. You still sense the kind of feeling of this suffering of the people when you enter there. Okay, a beautiful quote. And he prefers joining with those. You see, the African slaves preferred to come to the Muslims who were free people, right? Who exercised their right and their freedom of religion, and they lived it. He prefers joining with those who have been his friends in his distress, who invited and encouraged him to bring his children to the same school, to attend the same mosque, and to look forward to meeting in the same paradise. This preference of slaves for Islamic knowledge and lifestyle created a fear amongst the British rulers that all the subjugated non-whites would become Muslim. You see, there's a beautiful statement there. The British thus, as they consolidated their power in the Cape, created English church schools that would Christianize non-white children in Cape Town. The Muslim home schools, which flourished during the Dutch rule, had imams writing basic religious teaching booklets in Arab Afrikaans, a colloquial language that mixed Dutch, Indonesian, Malaysian, Javanese, English and Arabic script, and English and Arabic in Arabic script. Thus the Cape Malay imams wrote the first humble Afrikaans booklet for Islamic teaching in their home-based schools in 1850. So that was the first books that they could write. Excuse me. It was not the white Afrikaner who wrote the first Afrikaans book, but the Muslim priests, the imams. What is important here is, what did they write? They wrote the books on how to be pure, how to be clean. The tahara, which is the cleanliness, how to rinse yourself when you go to the toilet, how to bath, when you on the Friday, how to bath after sexual intercourse with your wife, and your wife with her husband, how to eat, how to take wudu. Those are the necessary features of a Muslim's life that they need to know, which is called tahara, the cleanliness. It's the lessons on cleanliness. So you'll find those particular books will tell you the nimab das su, you take ablution like this, and you do this, etc., etc. And you'll mix up all the different languages because the people spoke this, what they call Creole, but it is a created language because they came from different places and they amalgamated through their faith and was able to create a language which they understood. And the imams wrote this kind of language in a what we would call a standardized way, not a kind of a rough way, but a standardized way, and a kind of a ethical way. They combined these languages and created khutbahs, lectures on Fridays, and booklets for people to teach them about Islam, the practice of Islam. So thus the Cape Malay Imams wrote the first humble Afrikaans booklets for Islamic teaching in their home-based schools, the madrasas, in 1850. It was not the white Afrikaner who wrote the first Afrikaans book, but the Muslim priests. The Imams brought the knowledge of Islam to the people through their own language instead of forcing the ruler's foreign language onto learners. This is very important. In other words, these Imams were learner-centered already. They didn't force another language onto a people and with a curriculum and then expect them to learn this new kind of official language. No, they actually went down to the learner, and they were learner-centered resources to ensure that the learner understands the quality of the work. So the Imams brought the knowledge of Islam, yes. The Dutch and English rulers forced their language on the subjugated people and thus failed in converting them to Christianity. I mean, the French were actually prevented from using French when the French Huguenots came here. They were forced not to use their language, and so French didn't flourish in Cape Town because the colonials wanted their language to be the language. And interesting enough, it was because the Boere, the Afrikaner, forced Afrikaans into the black schools that caused the riots of 1976. Again, it was the language force of the colonialists and the rulers that caused problems. You couldn't get past and educate people by forcing them to use your language because you are trying to break the identity of people. Now, the Muslims, priests and imams, etc., some of them were pure Arabs, they were real Arabs. And there were people who mastered the Arabic language, and they came from other countries and they had other languages, but they looked at the people. What do the people need? And how can we bring the knowledge of Islam to them through their vernacular, through their knowledge, through their particular identity? And thus the people became excited about Islam. So it was learner-centered already. So the Imams brought the knowledge of Islam to the people through their own language instead of forcing the ruler's foreign language on them. So vernacular education, now they call it vernacular education. One thing about the academic world, they spend their life defining and redefining and the whole PhD is about redefining this. And so they split things up into pieces. And Allah says in the Quran that the kuffar likes to split things up into pieces. But the Arabic has got this power to unite things, which is something that I have used in the transformation of education towards realistic leisure learning, which comes at the back of the book, basically. And I was very fortunate that Professor Ajam, in actual fact, did an assessment of the pioneering work that I did just prior before he passed away. And he was impressed with this particular methodology. And he says, if I'm alive, I will support you. He wasn't alive by the time I established it, but alhamdulillah, two of the articles that I was asked to write for the Argus Argus asked me to write a feature article every week called Education Watch to pioneer that work. And two of the articles I quoted Professor Ajam, late Professor Ajam. So he did help, even after his death. He did support me in the sense that I quoted his work, alhamdulillah. So, you know, there's something about Islam and the concept of consciousness and the reality that goes beyond the material thinking. There is an energy that goes beyond your physical material world. Now, I like my wife's point. She says, if you want to know that there is another life after this, the simple principle of conservation of energy proves it to you. Energy cannot be destroyed, neither can it be created, but it is transformed from one form to another. There is your proof of the fact that there must be another life after death. So we have to be careful how we live this life, inshallah. May Allah make it easy for us, inshallah. Vernacular education, home language learning, considered the resources available to introduce new learning. This was the most impressive achievement of the Cape Muslim spiritual leaders, the Imams. The methodology considered the learner. It was already then learner-centered, a feature in education that the Western governments today, 2019, even 2022, are still finding hard to adapt to it. Although they know it's necessary, but their need for control overrides the intelligence to act in the interest of the learners, and hence at a major loss of skills, job opportunities for all, and economic development of the Western countries. A beautiful piece. Professor Adam captures that in this particular thesis of his. Even Harvard University, I just opened up a YouTube on their discussion on the future of education. They're struggling with curriculum because they want a curriculum that they say the curriculum is failing the people. Of course it fails the people because it's like 20 years behind time in terms of the development of people. And now they are concerned about the fact that the universities are not providing the job opportunities for the and skills for the people. Of course they won't be able to, because the lecturers are still lecturing their old curriculums, and the world has gone fast forward in terms of technology. So instead of them saying, let us take from the students and let the students help us in terms of where we can give them those opportunities, but the whole structure of the universities have failed because it's a bureaucratic structure that doesn't actually feed. It still feeds the old bureaucratic and industrialized education, and the industry has already changed. So the professor asked a question in his research to the students: what if the career that you are following at university is obsolete in 3 years? What will you do? And they present the talk as if it's the students' fault. To me, it was a joke, because if it becomes obsolete in the 3 years that the university is offering, it is the university who is not up to date with what's happening in the marketplace. They can't now. They're easy to like switch the responsibility or the blame onto the student, while the university lecturers and university infrastructure is not cut out for the new world of the fast technological advancements that is happening. And our students are further than us in terms of the cell phones even. So we need to acknowledge that. And we know from a scientific point of view, the cell phone that we have in our hands, they say, is more powerful than the first rockets they sent into space. And the kids know more about that than what we do. So we are really far behind unless we involve and bring them on board, like these particular people have brought the people on board through their vernacular, and then be able to exercise a qualitative educational model and learning culture, as well as teaching them skills. A great number of Muslims could not read the Latin script of the European Dutch and English, but their knowledge of reading Arabic script for Quran reading allowed them, the Imams, the Arabics, using the Arabic script and vowel structure to create religious booklets in Arabic, Afrikaans, which I call Kaps. Sheikh Ahmad's book on the Betroubare Woord in Cape Dutch using Arabic script was the first Afrikaans book in South African history. And look at the word, die betroubare woord. You can see that the Imams did not use the scholarly language. The Imams did not use, and the Muslims of the Cape did not use scholarly language, which the so-called white producers and funding of these particular films of Tikkie van die Boelkaap and written by Muslims, but they only get funding if they have that kind of stuff, which my poem in actual fact on misplaced art. During apartheid, they only published things that entrenches apartheid thinking. So if coloreds, etc., or blacks or somebody wanted to write something, they will only publish that which relates to colored identity or black identity or Indian identity, whatever it is. But when you present something new, something advanced, they wouldn't publish it. So I call this in my poem, call it like misplaced art. You only publish that which you want to in order to entrench the idea of apartheid. And I asked in my poem, you break loose of that kind of old ideas and that kind of do something new. And we can do it. So the betroubare woord in 1814. That was in 1814 when Sheikh Ahmad wrote this particular betroubare woord. These cultural booklets by Muslim clerics were a cultural milestone in South Africa in the 19th century. They mixed vernacular carps. This mixed vernacular carps became the standard means of instruction for Cape Muslims. This development aroused concern in the Christian missionary fraternity, especially those that did missionary work amongst Cape Malays. Thomas Fothergill Lightfoot made no strides in the conversion of the Cape Town labor class because they had a different communication vernacular and did not understand English. They didn't understand the little booklets that they made in terms of missionary work. So Mr. Henry Solomon, who could speak Cape Dutch, helped Lightfoot's mission in an attempt to bring the truth to Cape Muslims and the labor class. Christian charitable missionary schools became prevalent in the 19th century. And getting Muslim children to stay at these schools were difficult because of their strong Islamic faith and their self-employed craft skill parents who offered them, their children, training and jobs very early in their life. And that is something which they couldn't stop. This is the beauty of the Muslim community of the Cape Muslims. They didn't send their children to school. If you didn't want, they said, I'm going to speak like that. Ons gaat nie ons kinders school toe stuur nie, want hulle gaan Chris word. Sy gaan 'n ambag leer and you're going to learn the deen. And that's beautiful. I'm going to translate it to Afrikaans now, okay? Ons gaan nie ons kinders na hierdie Christen skole stuur nie. Hulle gaan ons kinders vir Chris, if I put it that way, okay? They're going to become Christian. We will send them to a craftsman to learn a craft, and then they can work with him and they can get a job immediately. So our parents created jobs for our children, something that we've lost a plot, which I'm trying to bring back in terms of my youth employment project. So yes, they set a standard. So especially those, they couldn't make breakthrough. So Christian charitable missionary schools became prevalent in the 19th century, but was getting the Muslims to stay in schools, that was a difficult task because their strong Islamic faith and their self-employed craft-skilled parents who offered their children training and jobs very early in their life. And so, you know, it relates to the hadith. Nabi Muhammad is related to said, Ya ma'ashara shabab, oh, you teenagers, marry if you can afford it. And if you can't afford it, then fast. So there is the encouragement of adults to make sure that the youth are able to earn so that they can get married, because it's a protection for them, for their private parts, for their health, for the sanity, etc., and for the ability to start in a family confidently and then to build a society. Marriage is important for young people. Now, if you keep young people in a school where you frustrate them, then all the other problems will become prevalent, because you are not preparing them for a job. We're not giving them a job. We're not employing them so that they can get married and have sexual intercourse in a halal, in a faith-based way, that they will feel comfortable with families that are connecting, not having sex outside marriage. And this, so the schooling and the educational system, the way we are, it actually forces people to move out of the ambit of sincere, faithful, religious communication through marriage. So that's a big issue. So we'll take it at another time, okay? Because that was my research has brought forward, and we'll tackle that later on. Okay, so give them life early jobs, and so they got married very early. And my mother was 19 when she got married. The other lady was 16 when she got married. Her husband was a fisherman. My father's father was a property owner, and my father was a painter. So yes, they would marry early. They would raise their children in the big families, etc. And they had big weddings. Oh my goodness, they had such beautiful weddings that colonialists were like, what? Look at the kind of weddings they give, because it was sadaqah. They would give one another food. I will give the chicken, and I will give the meat, and I will give the fruit. It was not about money. It was about community-based, healthy, supported family out of Muslim sadaqah, the basic charity for each other. Because they know when they give charity, Allah gives them more. So the Muslims were not prepared to send their children to their missionary schools for too long. Even if the children were talented, they will say, okay, come on, Islam, come out to school. You with me? You can come out of the school, because you're going to become Christian. You're going to lose your faith. And you see that happening today with people becoming school-based and university-based. You start starting some Muslim children, they don't know where they are, because education basically confuses people and makes everything look plausible so that they can create doubt. The main thing about the kuffar in the Quran is they create doubt. They create doubt in the minds of people. They create sectarianism, redefine things, etc. And so the people become confused. That's why the Quran starts with the first sentence. This is a book in which there is no doubt for those who have faith in Allah, and have taqwa and consciousness of the Creator. It removes all doubt, because the kuffar and the kafir and the non-Muslim creates doubt in every particular feature. And these old people, as they used to say, old people don't know things. They knew more because they were practicing Muslims. Of the little that they know, they practice sincerely. Today we know a lot, but our sincerity is like, oh my goodness, okay. We're not going to go there, because there are still sincere people that are making changes, alhamdulillah. So the Muslims were not prepared to send their children. So by 1814, only 20% of school pupils were Muslim. Muslims of the time were more interested in maintaining their Islamic identity and their practice than to succumb to the Western Christian cultural education. A beautiful point. Their children's basic reading and writing skills were enough for them. My mother finished grade 3, but she was an intelligent woman. As long as they can read and write, it's fine. Come back to school, you can learn, and you can get a job by us. Okay? Writing skills were enough for them. Thereafter, their children were trained into a craft and taught religion by the leerbaas, skilled artisans who also taught religious studies. Their fear of Christianization, and their valued craftsmanship for survival made colonial Christian academic schools unattractive to them. Alhamdulillah. Big point to me. After 10 years, Muslim children were removed from these Christian missionary schools and attended their own madrasas, Muslim religious schools, until they were 15 years old, and then they joined the parents as craftsmasters in the workforce. Mason relates that Malay schools were well organized, were a well organized facet of the Muslims' cultural life. Listen to this. A quote. The Malay schools were well organized, were a well organized facet of, or was a well organized facet of the Muslims' cultural life. Now that could never have happened if they were descendants of slaves, because slavery was only abolished in 1836, and it was forced on them. They would not have let the Muslim slaves, if the Muslims were descendants of slaves, they would not have been able to develop this powerful community, self-sustaining community. Okay, the Imams of the Cape had a very comprehensive system of education, and they also had fairly large enrollments. The system of education introduced by the British governors proved to be a total failure, according to Sir Lowry Cole. It proved a total failure. Government schools had school fees, and it excluded the poor communities of the Cape. Poor children left the mission schools to assist with family maintenance. A Cape government grant in aid scheme started aiding public education, but this aid was only for Christian missionary schools. European philanthropists funded the mission schools. The Muslim families did not trust the Christenskole. Muslim schools, madrasas, were excluded from the state funding. Despite this, Muslims were good citizens and of a great benefit to the state of the time, so the madrasas were tolerated. Beautiful. The Muslims helped the British government to defend the colony in 1848 in the Battle of the Axe. The Cape Governor, Sir Harry Smith, as a goodwill gesture, summoned Muslim religious leaders to a meeting to discuss the Muslim community's needs. And I made the point earlier in another video, the Muslims would defend the country, allows them to be free in their faith, because any other aggressor might put their religion force them out of their religion. So they have to protect their religion. So if that governor protects their particular religion, asks them to defend the country, they will do it. It's not about supporting oppression. It's about them standing firm to protect a country in which they are, so that their faith can be free, so they freedom of their faith. So this is basically the mindset of the Muslims, who said, we'll go and we'll fight. And even on condition they give us a piece of land. They were prepared to give their life for a piece of land, for a masjid. So the Cape government grant the Battle of the Axe, and Sir Harry Smith, as a goodwill gesture, summoned Muslim religious leaders to the meeting to discuss the Muslim community needs, with the aim of promising to build Muslim schools. Isn't it interesting? In 1866, the Cape Anglican Archbishop, listen to this, the Cape Anglican Archbishop intervened with the notion that non-whites were inferior. This is a Christian Anglican Archbishop. And they are expected to accept white supremacy and do business at the back door rather than in the living room. The manner in which the Cape Muslims conducted themselves during the epidemics, the anti-convict struggle, the hardships, the poverty, and the efforts to establish their own schools and educational system, teaching Dutch, English, accounting, writing, won the admiration and fear of the Cape Muslims. For the Cape Muslims, they were rivals to the colonial Christian oppression. And you can say it's Christian oppression if that's the Archbishop's words. He intervened and stopped that funding of Sir Harry Smith to fund the building of madrasas and more madrasas, because the British were clever guys, you know. They know where the food lies. You know, they will give, and they will work with those who assist them, and the Muslims assisted them in keeping the Cape a moral standard of living which they admired. And now you have this white fraternity, or this I don't want to be racist, but I mean you have this kind of colonial fraternity that tries to discredit the Muslims through these weird kind of movies and that they make to try and discredit the Muslims' faith through scholarly and crime-related scripts, and then use the burqa with masjids in the background with a murder scene in front and the masjid in the background, deliberate discrediting, trying to discredit the Muslim strength in the burqa. And then taking unemployed people and give them some money to support them. This is like a major issue here in the burqa, which is difficult to fight because there is an agenda behind this particular filming departments, etc., and the filming funding, etc. And we must become aware of that, and then basically say no to this. And sometimes they even bring scripts that says one thing, and then when the people see the movie, then they've changed the script and it's actually negative. And then the people are very upset, but now it's done already. And they go internationally with these kind of terrorist kind of movies and heists, etc., with Muslims doing it, and drugs that Muslims do, etc., as if Muslims generally are bad people. And we know, people know it is not so. So, a petition it won the admiration of the Cape Muslims and fear for the Cape Muslims. They were rivals to the colonial Christian oppression. A petition to the acting judge of police against the Cape Muslims' rati practice, sword cutting and stabbing religious ceremonies, which left no injury. That's another thing that made them scared of the Muslims on the Cape of burqa, is that they had this rati where they hit themselves with a sword and it doesn't cut it. It's like, it doesn't happen. Nothing happens, you know. So there was a petition of that was signed by the colonialists to the judge of police against the Cape Muslims' rati practice, sword cutting. Brought P.E. de Roubaux, I don't know how to pronounce this, it's Roubaix. It brought him in close contact with the Muslims of the burqa. He approached the Muslim business people because he's trying to find, like, where's the leader? There was no leader. So he decided to approach the business people of the burqa to attain a negotiated settlement, downsizing the drums and recital tone, just effectively stop it, but then later on have a negotiating settlement in order to bring down the drums and the sound, the recitals. The burqa Muslim businessman then struck a deal with him. This is very interesting. The burqa business people, there was just a few very, very powerful business people I'm talking about now, very rich, okay? But others are also self-sustaining business people. The burqa Muslim businessmen or business people then struck a deal with him to ensure that he defends Muslim rights in the parliament if he wishes to set the settlement agreement to continue and for their electoral support, because the business people were allowed to vote in the old South Africa. Not the common people, only the rich people were allowed to vote. So the business people said, we'll vote for you on condition you stand for us. Whenever anything comes up for Muslims, against Muslims, you will speak on our behalf. Then we will speak to the Ratib Jamaas and says, okay, just slow it down. But that would depend on what you're going to do for us. Very interesting. Cape Town newspapers later saw his exertion for Muslims as a monstrous offense of his class, quote. Unquote. It was quoted in the newspaper. It's a monstrous, his particular defense of Muslims in parliament was a monstrous offense to his class. On behalf of the Muslims, de Roubaux defended the Muslims' religious and educational needs in parliament. Cape government and public at large came to accept that Muslims were free to pursue their religious practices and teach their children their creed without restrictions. That's the second protection of the Muslims in the Cape. First, in 1658, the placard that says nobody, that was reinstituted in Cape Town, that nobody must disturb the Muslims, craftsmen that are coming to build the Burqa. The second is the Ratib caused a stir, and then the Rubal defends the Muslims in Parliament.